4 of everything popping off in Chile. So I'm kind of going to go through in broad both what's happened the past 3 weeks, but also the kind of like long-term, history of the dictatorship, history especially before the dictatorship, that a lot of things happening now kind of vibe off of. But I first want to acknowledge that today, November 14th, is the 1-year anniversary of the death of a Mapuche indigenous youth named Camilo Catrillanca, who was killed last year by the Chilean police. So the Chilean kind of state has this natural police system called the carabineros, like the carabiniers, I guess, to trace it. And so, on one hand, they're the most trained, like actually the most well-trained police force in the Americas, like more trained than any American police force. But also, yeah, it's one police force that's basically just a military, like the National Guard. That's just the only police that's down here. And so, yeah, about a year ago today, or less than a year ago today, Camilo Catrillanca was killed by the police. It was actually a special forces who were looking for someone who stole 3 trucks in a school. And so they shot him in the back and arrested his friend. And what they said in the news was that there was no videos of the shooting to challenge their narrative, which was that there was a firefight between Camilo and the police. And then the Minister of the Interior, Andres Chadwick, who has since been thrown out of office after this whole, what's called the social explosion, Estallido Social, said that, Camilo Catrillanca was a criminal. So basically, much like how in the U.S. around like Black Lives Matter or Ferguson, there was this attempt to portray Camilo Catrillanca as a criminal, a delinquent, and also the narrative that there was a firefight between the police and Camilo. However, the actual body cameras of the police service showing that in fact he was unarmed. In fact, the police killed him while his back was turned. And when this was released, there was basically a huge revolt all throughout Chile. So this was the first time in Santiago since the dictatorship, since about 1986, that there were a few street battles in Santiago between the police and people, barricades throughout the city. This was the first time, instead of having a political movement based on a march where you go from one spot and then go to another spot and you have signs, it was just people setting up barricades. And so I kind of want to focus on this point because on one hand, what happened today, on the anniversary of his death, is very similar to what happened a year ago, to where people were out in the streets chanting, playing music, setting up barricades. But then also, the big issue with Camilo's death was that it revealed that the police have a huge apparatus here of framing suspects, of systemically, how do I phrase this? Basically systemically, framing suspects to portray them as delinquents. And this is something that's gone on since the dictatorship, and the Mapuche communities have been saying the dictatorship never ended. Dictatorship-era forms of oppression still go on today. And so the past 3 weeks, with the government declaring a state of exception, bringing the military to the streets, suspending the right to assemble, the right to free speech, enacting a curfew for the week of the first week of Estallido Social, so the social explosion, was basically showing everyone that, this whole idea of democracy that we have inherited, especially like young people who were raised in this kind of democratic era, and were taught that this is a different kind of life than the life my parents had. It was just entirely kind of blown to the wind. So kind of starting with that as a kind of 1 year, kind of before and after type thing, and then kind of want to go into, so what's happening right now? Why is Chile basically up in flames? Why are 1/4 of all Walmarts looted? 250 streetlights ripped down in Santiago? 90% of, I just love these facts. 90% of all supermarkets in core neighborhoods are just looted and closed. And then 25% of all of the supermarkets in the country are just gone with flame. So basically what it's like when I'm walking on the street is I can't really bike because there's barricades, there's just missing pavement everywhere. Today, just like just coming back home, so like my friend I call Matt, I just had to dodge a kind of like water cannon tank that the police used because they constantly come down my street and there's constantly people in the block just kind of running this way. So why is this the case? So fast forward a month ago, there was this big social movement called Evasión Masiva, or mass evasion. So some of you probably saw online, this was against a metro rise, a rise in the metro fare. So the metro in Santiago is privatized. It's for profit, and it also has like a tier system. So if you take the metro between 6 and 7 a.m., it's the cheapest. But if you take during rush hour, it's the most expensive. And so they were by citing, hey, like gas is more expensive, the dollar is more expensive, we need to raise the metro fare. So they're going to raise the fare during rush hour. And when people are complaining, hey, this is already the second most expensive metro system in Latin America, and if you make minimum wage, which here is about $300 a month, the metro just going to and from work would take about 20% of your monthly income. So for people who need to, go work in the informal economy, so say go to downtown and sell clothes or sell food, people who work multiple jobs, they're just seeing this as just less and less money they're getting. And the Minister of the Economy, he said something like, oh yeah, this is great because it'll help you wake up earlier. So one of the big kind of narratives right now, which I'll kind of break to a lot, is on one hand, the idea of this movement exploded because people don't want any more abuses. So not only this idea of, yeah, we live precariously, there's a lot of misery in Santiago and huge inequality, but the idea that it's specifically humiliating, but also humiliating because the rich, the political class, the term people use a lot, basically project the precarity at the fault of poor people themselves. But then also this constitutes a form of abuse, constitutes a form of taking advantage of this current political system institutions, especially regarding levels of corruption, which I'll get back to later, which are enabled because you have a political elite, which also there's people in the country who both run the public infrastructure of the country, but then also are connected to the private companies that they partner with. And yeah, so the government refused to drop metro prices, so high school students began this movement called mass evasion. And so I first saw this through Instagram, people sharing stories. Sharing this on Instagram stories, flyers saying mass evasion this week, don't pay the metro, boycott. I was like, oh cute, this is fun. And just thought it was something like much like a boycott in the US where, don't buy Driscoll's strawberries or something. And then I started seeing the YouTube videos, Instagram videos of people, particularly, of course, like neighborhoods of Santiago, just jumping turnstiles in mass, like after school. But not only that, they would start smashing the turnstiles, so everyone who was following behind them would get it for free. And one of the cool was people in the news would interview these kind of random middle-aged people just who were there witnessing this and asking, hey, what do you think about all these youth vandalizing? And they would often say, I'm too old, I can't jump, but I'm stoked they're doing this because I can get it for free now. Other people would say, I can't, risk my job or I can't risk X, but I'm so happy these youth are taking this initiative and fighting for all of us. So immediately, because this was a movement both against something that was hugely unpopular, but then also done in a way in which anyone who was there would benefit, it actually immediately got a large swath of the population on board, which is kind of different from other social movements that have happened here in Chile, which I'll get to in a bit, such as the big 2011 student movement, which is a big student movement against the privatized education system. Very similar to university student movements that happened in the US around that time. So thinking about University of California or Emory around the cuts in 2013. But that was always seen as being like, those are the students doing their student thing, trying to like enact changes in the university system. But like, has nothing to do with me, some random person living in a Port Santiago neighborhood. Whereas here, what you saw was a bunch of people from these neighborhoods just immediately on board and stoked to see high school students, living it up and jumping turnstiles. And then that being said, having Instagram be the main way in which people were showing these videos was also the main way people saw police brutality. So you would see riot police defending the metro, beating up high school kids trying to get on the metro. And also, they would start closing the gates to the metro, so no one could get on. So you have this weird inversion to where it went from, we're going to invade, to we're going to protest at the gates because we're all pissed that the police are keeping us from getting to work, keeping us from getting home from work, and shut down the metro. And so then like the kids would like, push the gates and push it open and everyone would run in. And then, fast forward to October 19th, that date's kind of like ingrained in my head now. It was Friday at rush hour. As a result of these protests, a bunch of metro stations in the city were vandalized, irreparably damaged, some caught fire, and the police, in response to this, just shut down the metro in the entire city. So for me, I was just like kind of going to different mass evasion protests in the city, and I had a meeting to get to in like the opposite side of town. And so I was like at one metro station watching this whole situation transpire where tons of different people were yelling at the police saying, we're trying to get home, we're trying to get, to work, let us on the metro, and the police didn't let them. And then I was like, okay, this is great. I'm just going to, take the bus to this meeting across town. And then I saw, oh wait, the bus line is huge. A lot of these like mass evasion protests ended up going into the streets. So now, if you imagine a protest at every single metro station in the city going into the streets, which are typically kind of major streets of the city, then you have buses and cars backed up. So essentially, the entire city's public transit is shut down on a Friday rush hour, and so everyone's walking home. And then marches are going too. So people walking home are joining marches, cars driving by are supporting mass evasion because they're workers coming home from work. And so this is the rhythm of the major chant for mass evasion is, how did it go? It's like, evadir, no pagar, otra forma de luchar. And so you just hear cars honking everywhere.